Hello, everyone. Welcome back to this live episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Ascari. We got back with us, Tyler. How's it going, Tyler?
Oh, it's going pretty good. I mean, other than the fact we're in Canada and we're not doing so well either socially or economically. But, you know, it may sound like a black pill, but it's always darkest before dawn. So, you
And
know,
besides those two facts, just minor facts. Besides that, everything is dandy.
yeah, I mean, everybody's, at least where I am, my family, we're all in pretty good health. So for the time being, it's going as best as it can right now. So,
Well, we're off to a good start. A good optimistic message. Tyler, let me frame the discussion, and then, as always, you just take it away. You're the expert communicator. I'm looking mass immigration. To me, that's a huge problem, and I'm looking at the left. They're the driver of this problem. I'm looking at the right, and people have lost their minds. You and I talked about this. They lean heavily into the race argument, whether right or whether wrong. They say it's population replacement, military age men. It's an anti-life agenda, like they're trying to depopulate the planet. When you and I first talked, and it was on my first episode, but you said that what's actually happening is that Canadians have dropped out of the labor force, so we have a labor force participation issue, and they're bringing in immigrants to plug that. Let's use that as a jumping off point. Why don't you take it away?
okay. Well, first, I really don't think it's just isolated to Canada. I think it is a Western problem. Like most Western nations are, I wouldn't say starting, but are really starting to see massive labor participation problems in certain areas, specifically with, you know, males, typically white. Um, it's just population demographics. It's not a race thing. Ages 18 to 36 of just dropping out of the labor force, whether it's due to um, disability or mental health, any number of reasons really. There's also a growing number that are dropping out due to the growing economic malaise that started in 2008 when the economy was fundamentally broken, hasn't really recovered. um, I think with mass immigration, we really shouldn't go into race, because we are either as dissidents or conservatives, like we're fighting the media, and you're getting into a ring with the Mike Tysons of race grifting. There's no possibility of winning. So at least if we keep it to, like, whether or not all these conspiracies about why mass immigration is happening, whether or not that's true is irrelevant. Talking about it, you sound crazy. Like, if you can't explain this to, someone you know and trust without sounding like a loon, why are you getting on the internet and just going off on it? Like, stuff isn't the greatest worldwide, but specifically in Canada, it's serious problems with just the economy in general, and no real solutions have been put forth that have even a chance of helping. It's all, well, we should get the government to do this. We should get the government to stop doing this, instead of, looking at, well, what's wrong? Why aren't people working? Why isn't there real growth in the economy? Why, since 2008, no, let me correct myself. Since the 80s, why has the growth trend worldwide started to flatten? Like, pre 1990s, we had year over year growth trends of well over 12%. Now, the Liberal Party of Canada is going on and on about we're the greatest in the G7 because we have a projected growth for this year of 1.5%. In any reasonable time prior to now, they would be laughed at. and like booted from office for even suggesting that 1.5% growth is a good idea. Like, since 2008, though, globally, we've barely hit 4% year-over-year growth. And in a debt-based economy, less than 4% growth, or even at 4% growth, feels like a recession because businesses don't have, it's part capital, but it's more so velocity of money to properly compensate their workers. So you have a dual problem of people, not wanting or not being willing to work, and employers not being able to properly incentivize people to work like any time period before.
All right, let me jump in. You mentioned the 80s. We'll get to that. You said prior to the 90s, the growth was 12% year over year. Is that accurate?
Or, well, I wouldn't say there were times where you had more than 12%. You had 10%. It ranges, but for the most part, like real growth in the real economy, discounting financial sector, financial services, all banks, all that stuff. Yeah, you had, years prior to the 80s of like 20% growth. Like to most people that sounds outrageous because we're so used to, highs of 3.5% growth over a year. There's there's nothing, economically stopping it from happening. There's certain problems in the monetary system that have, made the speed of which money can change hands and how much is changing hands at any given point slow to a crawl. But I think there's ways around that if we could just properly allow not corporations or big businesses, but smaller businesses to have a chance. Like not even give them a path to success, give them a path to starting a business is really what we need.
So let's go back at a 10-12% growth. Is that purely per capita, or is that also because of the population's growing?
In part, it's due to population growth. Like every time you see, at least my theory on why the liberals are trying to bring in all the immigrants is like everybody else in Canada, they look at US politics and say, oh, let's just, do what they do. The best case of that is Trudeau can't win on making the race about economics, so he always throws in the abortion issue just to be like, this is a topic we can win with our partisans on. Can't win on the economy, housing, but we can win on the narrative of around abortion. And when you look at it through that way, and you look at what happened in America and the waves of mass immigrants that came over, 180, 80 plus years ago, you have the wave of Italian immigrants, the Irish immigrants that came over, and eventually the Chinese. You saw massive explosions in real world growth across all sectors. So I believe they're working on that theory. But the problem with it is we're not bringing over the same kind of immigrants in the way of when the Irish, Italians, and to a lesser extent the Chinese, because Chinese, it gets a little complicated with, they were being imported almost as slaves due to the building of the railroads. But even still, eventually they all wanted to be American and eventually self-identified as Americans. Now they added on, okay, I'm Italian American, I'm Irish American, I'm Chinese American. But they always added on the I'm American. Whereas now you look at the mass immigration in Canada, you don't have that, oh, I'm Canadian as well. It's I'm Indian and I'm in Canada. So you don't have the integration aspect. And seeing as they're plugging holes instead of they're not even really plugging holes, they're putting band-aids on holes. You got a deep gash in the economy, and instead of, how do we suture this? It's, well, we'll just go to the band-aid box and start putting band-aids on it. And in doing so, you're creating this racial tension that is increasingly growing, and it's, most likely could grow into what we're seeing in England and the rest of the UK and Europe for that matter. But it's not specifically racial divide like you would see in America along, historical racism lines. It's a cultural divide. You're bringing in radically different cultures and saying you don't have to become Canadian. You get to retain that culture and we'll protect you from the Canadians. And that's where you're getting massive, conflict, and people are misidentifying this and taking it, the racial context, which talking about it is incredibly hard in this political climate with the left and their stranglehold over, mainstream narratives. Even on Twitter, like they pretty much control the narrative still. It's basically the right reacting to leftist talking points still, for the most part.
No, I agree with that. We're always on defense. I'm going to come back. You touched on so many things like assimilation, the Multiculturalism Act. I'll come back to that, but let's refocus here. Can you draw a line? What happened in the 80s that the growth plateaued, and then all the way to 2008? What happened in 2008 that demoralized people?
Okay, well, in the 80s, my theory is it's really a banking system problem that's causing multiple issues of just growth and stopping growth in general. By the 1980s, we start to see, the expansion of what I refer to and some others refer to as the Eurodollar system. It's a system that creates US denominated debt outside of US jurisdiction. And like by the 80s, you start to see trust in this system break down, where no longer can banks go to each other and get, these euro dollars without collateral. And it's almost always short-term loans, like 24 hours. Like if you look at, say, the repo markets, whether bi-party or tri-party, it's always roughly around 24-hour loan periods. So it's all short-term debt. And seeing as specifically repo markets, but other short-term loan markets are all the funding markets for banks, they've had to shift their balance sheets away from longer-term investments that promote growth in the economy to short-term, how do I get as much money as quickly as I can with this capital that I just got? So it's why you start to see in the 80s, like the stock market just take off and grow ridiculously high, but you don't see the reflection in real world growth of businesses and purchasing power. By the time we get to 2008, the balance sheets of banks are so out of whack. They're so balanced towards the front end of the curve of their debt load that banks really can't afford to hold, say, a loan for a big property development of like, say, $1 billion or so, because that's going to take years to be paid off, even in part. Like, you build a housing development and it's like, at least if everything goes well, it's about a year just to get permitting and stuff through city councils, provincial, you name it. And then, you've got a year of building at least. So it's like 2 years before money starts to come in for the developer, and that starts to get kicked to the bank. Meanwhile, the bank has debt that has to be paid off tomorrow. How do you balance that? You really can't. And the only money that big loans that go out are to, big businesses, say like Apple, that has, massive amounts of cash on hand, or massive real estate loans, and that's just because commercial real estate, there's constantly money coming in. But right now, the real estate prices are all crashing back down to earth. Interest rates are too high, so you're starting to see cash flow problems there. Yeah, my basic theory is it's an economic mess caused by the banks, in part due to them really wanting to go all digital, because it's easier and better for them to go all digital, while governments don't want, well, at least they didn't want to go all digital. We still have cash. And specifically in the 80s, it was, cash really was talking. And what else? I mean, like, government regulations for banks are completely out of whack. Like, banks are required to have certain amount of percentages of bank reserves, which are a toxic asset on their balance sheet. Like, a bank reserve, most people think of it as money. It's not. It's an IOU to the local central bank, and the central bank dictates when and how you can use that, basically by when they do QE and QT. So it's an asset that, well, yes, it does earn you a percentage at the central bank. I can't do anything with it. I can't even loan it out because it's not a free market item. Nobody wants bank reserves. Banks also have to keep a certain amount of percentage of each denomination of sovereign bonds, whether that be, I need to have X percentage of 6-month bonds to I need to have X percentage of 30-year bonds. And that stuff can't be used as collateral like banks want it to be. It just needs to sit on the balance sheet doing nothing but earning a meager interest. Like, it's a multifaceted problem of banks wanting to go a certain direction. They need certain amount of financial instruments to operate in the current climate, and governments and central banks just not knowing what's really going on in the banking system, and just bumbling around of like, hey, we saw this worked one time, let's try that. And the specific instance I'm thinking of is in 1907 in America. There was what was shaping up to be the largest stock market crash of all time. It was like larger than the Great Depression. But what happened is the largest central clearinghouse came in and created its own version of bank reserves, just a temporary IOU that provided liquidity to the banking system so that trades could go through and you wouldn't see a crash. And nobody talks about 1907. The free market solved the problem. It increased liquidity temporarily, and it's not even recognized now as a speed bump. It's not even really taught. But later, when the Federal Reserve was created and, the stock market crash of 1929 came around, they're like, oh, we'll just copy what they did, but worse in every way, and created bank reserves.
All right, let me bring that back down to earth for us normal people who aren't econ experts. 2008, you're a hot dog vendor. 2008 happens. What's going on in the mind of a hot dog vendor that says, you know what, I'm just never gonna work again? Like, how does somebody just choose to drop out of the labor force?
Um, it's not so much choose; it's more pushed out. Um, in the example, the hot dog vendor would see, significant drop in sales, harder to access business loans, eventually, not being able to pay off the debt, maybe losing their house or whatever collateral they put up, then they're back to, nothing. And seeing, job prospects not really being there, you get disenfranchised. And like, you take example now, try putting your resume out there and see how many, if anybody calls back, even if you're qualified, or, let's say you get in for an interview. It's, well, nobody's really hiring because we're in that part of the recessionary cycle again, where it's not just now hiring freeze. We've pushed on into, oh, now we have to actually do layoffs because cash flow is a problem. Businesses aren't being able to meet their weekly, bi-weekly cash requirements of paying their employees. So, and, on top of that, the way business works in this day and age is basically every business has got a pretty large debt overhead that constantly needs to be paid off. Like, cash is just, like, money in general is just stretched too thin, and the effect on the working person is a demoralization that's like, well, why should I participate if I'm just going to get screwed again?
I hear what you're saying, but when I look at the facts on the ground, it doesn't make sense. So you got a Canadian guy who's a hot dog vendor. He gets pushed out because of circumstance, and he's down and out on his luck. So the government goes and brings in a foreigner to base. I'm making this up, but to man that hot dog stand. So the government's saying there is a labor shortage. There's a demand for hot dogs, but nobody wants to staff the hot dog stand. And then the government comes in and subsidizes the foreigner's salary by 50%. Like, nothing makes sense. Do you understand what I'm coming at?
Yeah, I understand it. It like they're trying to make, numbers look good on a spreadsheet is basically it. They see relatively the same things that I'm seeing. They probably have access to more information than I do because, all the numbers they put out, you can't trust whatsoever. Um, I'd love it if they put out the raw data and then everybody could look and see, okay, this is specifically what we're seeing, what's going wrong, and we could come to a better solution, or even have a semi-functioning solution that starts to get back on track. But I like I don't know why they're not trying to push, you know, Canadians back into the workforce by, even if it's subsidies. I know we're on the side that hates government intervention. Sometimes it's necessary, especially if you want to make a sovereign nation, whether that's, because for a sovereign nation, you have to have industrial might, you have to have good defense, you have to have food production, you can't import food, you have to have medicine production, which we're still struggling with that even after Trudeau pumped in what is that, several $billions into different pharmaceutical manufacturers to build up domestic production, and as far as I'm aware, they still haven't broken ground. Um, it's a big mess, and it's complicated, like what they're exactly trying to do. But I think if we could find a way to get money flowing throughout the system faster, you'd see, participation rates go up, because prospects for the future look brighter. Like pay wouldn't, wage increases wouldn't be, 1 to 2%. You'd be looking at 5 to 10% probably if we really got everything back on track. Total compensation would probably grow as well. Like we can start to see this in 2019 in America, when Trump's tax cuts and all that started to take effect. America was moving to a 4-day workday organically, because the free market was trying to attract, higher skilled workers, and they just increased total compensation, they increased average wages, and then now post COVID, like everything looks so bleak, and all that's gone away. Total compensation packages are dropping. Like just from my own experience of, hopping on job boards and stuff, it's like the most basic stuff 5, let alone 10 years ago, for total compensation is now being advertised as like a big win.
Let's go. Let's do like a little bit of role playing. Going back to the hot dog vendor thing. You're a Canadian hot dog vendor. I'm an Iranian hot dog vendor. You've dropped out of the labor force. What do I bring to the table that you don't have? Am I like the world's richest hot dog vendor, and I'm bringing my money to Canada and investing it here?
No, it basically government subsidies, whether it's help getting loans or, subsidizing wages. Like right now, it's still unclear exactly if it's happening or not. But if we look at, say, Tim Hortons, franchisees are being accused of bringing in specifically Indian immigrants. I'm just being specific. I'm not trying to bring in race to it. And they are.
I find it helps if you use a fictitious country like Zanzibar land.
Okay, well, we can go with Zanzibar land or Outer Heaven for either one.
Yeah, you got the reference.
Yes. We bring them in, and the franchise owner is of the same nationality, and then what they're doing is not paying minimum wage or even above minimum wage. They're paying below and pocketing the rest to pump their numbers. Like that's just started to break of what's happening. I haven't found definitive proof, but I've started hearing stories of that, of like, oh, we're just, the Trudeau government is essentially bringing over indentured servants to plug in the gap in the labor force. So, the wage market in Canada is so messed up that businesses can't really afford not to have workers, but they can't really afford to have workers. So they started going back to old East India Company tactics. Or at
All
least
right, so
that's what I'm seeing or hearing about, I should say.
I've heard that too. So with East Indians, I've heard that it's basically slavery. With Iranians, I've heard that it's fraud. Like the Iranian has money in Iran, they pay the employee to sponsor them with that money that they got paid as salary. So it's two different issues. But going back to the Indian example, the Zanzibar land example, let's call it. Basically the economy can't function, so either you have to bring in slave labor, labor below minimum wage, or the government has to provide subsidies. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say there's massive economic distortions that, like, business in Canada just doesn't make sense at a fundamental principle. Like, it's hard to get enough cash flow to hire, like, if you know, you just started a business, it's hard to get enough cash flow to just hire one employee, because as soon as you hire now an employee, government comes in and now you have to deal with the Ministry of Labor and all their rules and regulations on top of that. And that's gotten way out of hand. So in Ontario here, just to explain how bad this is with the construction industry, in 2019, Ford introduced a new health and safety certification mess called CORE. And it took the first construction companies from 2019 till middle of 2022 to get certified. Part of that was, supply chain mess. But on average, it cost those construction companies $1 million to get certified as CORE compliant, their new health and safety standards. What construction company that operates on margins as small as 2 to 3% has $1 million extra lying around to get certified so that you can now work on the most reliable jobs in this market, which is government jobs, which is mostly, we've kind of let hospitals not be refurbished for 40 or 50 years. So it's kind of time that we have to do something now that the medical system is completely broken.
Let's leave core aside for the moment, besides the fact that it's going to make me angry. I hate it when we get more and more of these regulations. But would it be accurate to say that it would be political suicide for the government to come out and say, we're going to lower the minimum wage and we're going to scale back labor laws, so they're letting indentured servants come in and they're subsidizing wages? Is that somewhat accurate?
I think lowering the minimum wage laws probably necessary, but yeah, totally political suicide. Like, nobody wants to go from making $15 an hour. It's much higher than that, but say 15 to 14, or even 14.99. Nobody likes that. Like, decrease is unacceptable at any real standard, even if, okay, let's say, we lower minimum wage to whatever is reasonable to businesses, whatever they can reasonably afford. Man, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
No, I can tell you what I was driving at. Basically, the minimum wage laws and the labor laws at this, what they're set at right now is strangling the economy. Is that accurate?
Yeah, thank you. That's where I was going. Like, even if, let's say, we drop the wages and the strength of the dollar starts to come back, nobody's going to really be happy because the number is lower. Like, the nominal number is lower, even though your purchasing power has increased. It's just a psychological trick of numbers lower, this is not good. It used to be higher. Even if, say, we go back to the day where $100 in a grocery bill is a full grocery cart, not, a quarter of the cart. It just, looking at a lower paycheck psychologically it does psychological damage to a person. It's like, I used to have a higher number, now it's lower, even if things are better.
Okay, so I'm going to do something I don't like doing. I'm going to come to the defense of the Liberal government. So the Liberal Party, they're let's say they're looking at this and saying, guys, here are the two problems. Minimum wage is too high, and we got too many labor laws. What can we do about it? Well, it's political suicide if we tweak it. What can we go around it? Let's try to find some indirect way to lower the wages, and let's find some indirect way to remove the regulations. So the indentured servitude removes the regulations and lowers the minimum wage. The subsidies lower the minimum wage. Is that, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a reasonable possibility of what they're doing. Like, it makes a heck of a lot more sense than the most of the conspiracies, because, like, the majority of the liberals in charge happen to be white people. Like, if we're talking about it's white people trying to destroy the white race, it sounds ludicrous. Again, maybe true, but like, just don't go down that road. Economics is much easier to understand, even though it's a complicated mess. My thoughts on how we fix this is, cut back on, or make a unified labor law that would actually work. Work with businesses, make it reasonable. Don't, like, if I know the construction industry fairly well in my area, so like, it's what I use as examples. Like, you put, with the labor laws, all the responsibility, it's not on the company for the most part. Like, there's certain areas where a company can get around health and safety, and like, it will bite them in the back, but most of that is on site supers. It's like, you put it on the first rung of middle management. They're 100% reliable for health and safety on a job site. If you simplify that, make it reasonable laws, put some onus on the worker, because like, that's gone all out the window. What is it, 10 years ago, in my neck of the woods, there was like 3 to 4 incidents inside of 6 months where workers that were working at heights weren't wearing their harnesses and had severe incidents. Some died, some severely injured. And, the site supers and the companies did pay a little bit, but it, like, from what I understand from researching it, it was just the worker not putting on a safety harness or properly tying it. They're at fault. And yet we're blaming companies that are operating on razor thin margins, and expecting them to then pay. That's one aspect of a fix. I think a better, or a much more sustainable fix, because like, once you get into labor laws, you're going to deal with unions, and you have to deal with all that, like, striking, picketing, union bosses operating the way they were founded, which is as mobs, organized crime. So if you just, like, in Canada, we have basically every natural resource the modern world has. If we say, hey, let's open it up, let's mine a little bit, all right? We get, like, specifically now, copper and silver. Once, the economy is on the rebound, there's going to be a short squeeze on those two metals, because there's not enough new production mines coming online, and there's so many going offline, and have been going offline for the last few years. So if we start mining, eventually it'll make economic sense to be like, well, let's build railroads to these mines to faster and more economically move material. And then it's like, well, we've got the railroads, why don't we put them towards, aim them towards refinement, and then, well, if we have the refinement here in Canada, well, why don't we just do manufacturing? And then from manufacturing, well, now we have a solid manufacturing base. We have good, reliable jobs. We can now have a good, strong, reliable service industry of not just retail, but any number of services.
Tyler for prime minister. Yeah, I see your vision for Canada. You got this utopia. It's not even utopia. It's just a functioning nation. But it goes back to what you said earlier. Like if you want to be a sovereign nation, you have to be some level of self-sufficiency.
Yeah, basically my model is, you see what Russia's doing? Let's take a little bit of that. Not just, Russia's heavily reliant on oil and natural gas, but we've got basically everything. If we take a look at like Canada as, you know, in the game of civilization, it's just like Canada has everything. It's got room, it's got good arable land for crops. We've got the Canadian Shield that's got basically every mineral and metal that we could ever hope for. Alberta's got so much oil and natural gas. Uh, the three territories have got, you know, minerals, metals, and oil and gas up there that we're just not tapping into. Um, Out east, there's similar stuff. That's just not being tapped into of natural resources, like with the fisheries and their like quotas. What I don't understand is, why don't we have massive breeding programs for fish and we just release them into the ocean? Like, you go a decade or so of slowing down um the quotas, and you just drive up production of fish, and then we don't have this problem out east. Like, there's simple things that can be done, but instead of looking at, solutions that would work in a free market, we're looking at what can the government do to fill in the gap. You've got a crack in a concrete, and instead of, properly busting out the crack and then patching it, it's okay, well, we'll just put a little bit of sealant over top of it and hope nothing goes wrong. But, it always does go wrong. The crack is not fixed, so it's going to get wider, and now you have a cracked foundation. And instead of a simple patch, it's, oh, everything above the foundation has to be ripped down because now we have to redo the foundation. It's entirely messed.
That was a good analogy, and but with the foundation. But before that, the word I was looking for in Canuck Saram reminded me is autarky. Like there was a time when nations had to be self sufficient, otherwise they're technically not nations. But now there's this belief that everybody should just trade and specialize in what they're good at, and Canada doesn't have we can't make medicine now.
Yeah, globalism took over. Each nation is going to hyper specialize in something, and we hope that the supply chain never breaks down, which now it has. Like, I don't know if anybody who's listening out there is in logistics or is talking to anybody in logistics. Everybody I've come across is like, quaking because they're having serious issues, even to this day, of just getting reliable supply. Whether it's, due to the largest shipping lane on Earth being a little too dangerous right now because of what's going on in the Middle East, which is just driving up costs everywhere, or it's starting to not make financial sense again to ship things everywhere.
Tyler, I want to go back to the Zanzibar land thing. So we said subsidies, lowered minimum wage, lower regulations. I kind of get that, but it seems like it's a form of socialism, or maybe a state sovereign bank where the government is just coming in and adding what you call liquidity. What I don't understand is why are they only giving it to non-Canadians? Like why? What's going on?
That's a question I have no answer for. Like, there's no economic reason to do it that way. Because as we discussed, like if you subsidize, you provide the liquidity for the Canadian workforce, well, we can eventually get to a point where it's self-sustaining if we, do it reasonably well. And then, we have back to a sovereign nation. This might be due to like the whole the the philosophies that the people in power generally believe in derive from, Marx, Lenin, Engels, and those people typically hate the idea of a nation state, and they really hate the idea of a sovereign nation state. It may just be, let's create the globalist utopia that we have been promising for, you know, in the case of like Marxism, over 100 years. Uh, won't ever happen. Utopia is unachievable, but also Marxism is unattainable and unsustainable, as shown by every country that has leaned into Marxist ideologies, eventually having civil unrest, to say the least.
That's only because they haven't applied it correctly yet, Tyler. They'll get it right this time.
Oh, are we so sure about that? Because, what is it? President Xi announced in 2019 that they had entered late stage capitalism and they were finally ready to go after, what is that, 60, 70 or so, 80 years of going down the communism. We're finally at communism, that we can hit real communist ideology and create that utopia. And yet China is in the exact same spot Canada is with labor force participation, except it's much worse because the population is larger. So you're looking at anywhere from 5 to 35 million males between the age of 18 to 35 who are out of work in some fashion, who are getting desperate. And when this specific age group gets desperate, things tend not to go very well. You either have, um, uh, again, civil unrest, or in the likelihood of China, uh, most likely open rebellion at some point in the future, if things get bad enough, which, knowing how Xi handles things, it's going to get worse there, at least in my opinion. Like, that's why I'm not worried about, World War III with China, because the Chinese know they are in such a precarious position with their own population. If, the United States actually starts something, or the Chinese react and it starts something, uh, the alphabet agencies will have no end of volunteers in China to do partisan activities. Like, the Chinese already have an issue in the Xinjiao province, the province where the Uyghurs are. The CIA happens to be doing very similar deals in that province that they were doing in Benghazi, where they are handing over munitions and training to radical extremists that like to make things go boom.
Today's freedom fighter is tomorrow's attack on the homeland terrorist.
Pretty much.
Tyler, I hate doing this, but I am trying to take you back again. So we said, why are they not giving these subsidies to Canadian citizens? Let me come to the defense of the Liberals. Mr. Prime Minister, what should we do? All right, let's inject money into the economy. But then people will realize that our economy sucks. All right, fine. Let's just bring in immigrants and say we're doing it out of compassion. Is this like a last resort kind of injection of funds?
I mean, from their perspective and their ideology, that makes reasonable sense. It could be, but like my whole thing with the assessment of the Trudeau administration and everything they are talking about or trying to do is just reeks of desperation. We are trying to hold on to power for as long as possible. Whether that's, the goal of 4 million home starts this year, which, have they broken ground on a house yet? Because like the last thing I heard a couple months ago was they are yet to break ground. No, not even a hole has been dug. There's a Jagmeet Singh out there threatening, Loblaws being like, hey, you get your act together and bring those prices down. Otherwise, Big Daddy government's going to step in. We might nationalize you. Be careful. Although I don't think they would actually nationalize in name. They would probably do it in practice, but they like to go down more of the fascist road than say the communist road. Um, Trudeau and Singh, they like to have the facade of a free market, not the full communist manifesto of no, the government's just going to control everything. They like the facade. They can pretend, hey, we're a democracy, we're free, you're good. It's not while the word communism doesn't react to the reaction it should to most people nowadays. It's the 1950s Red Scare is gone. The word fascism does, because it's equated to Nazism, which is just one thought of fascism.
For the audience, I'm going to give the dumbed down version of fascism versus communism. Fascism is when the government comes in and says, "All right, you can keep your house and your business, but we'll tell you everything that you're allowed to do with it." Communism is like, "Screw that! I'm just going to take the house and business outright, but I'm still going to tell you what's going to be done with it." So I say fascism is like communism light.
In essence, it's the same thing. It's just we're gonna put makeup on communism and pretend it's not.
That's a good way to put it.
Uh,
I think I'm running out of steam. I keep looking at these comments, and so I get distracted. But where were we? So subsidies. Oh, here's what I was going to say. I feel like the problem is so big that we're throwing these political parties and these candidates at the problem, and they can't fix the problem. Like when government is the problem, regulations, minimum wage, interference in the market, and you're trying to solve it with more government, like it's not fixable. So Trudeau's like, all right, you know what? We'll patch it up. I think is a phrase you use. So we really need like a reality check. I think as a society to come to terms with this.
well, I think the first thing we should really do is organize at the small level and kind of just stop asking the government for permission. Like the with the mining thing, if a business took the risk, was able to secure funding somehow, um, and then just started mining, like what can the government really do? Sure, that they'll send up and they'll try and shut it down, but like just with COVID, we'll see people just continue to work on and just nah, we're just going to ignore you. And eventually, if enough people do this, the government will force the change and just accept reality. A little civil disobedience, as long as it's actually peaceful, not mostly peaceful, goes a long way.
I have a slightly different view. Like, I think parents, it's a long-term strategy, but you almost have to sacrifice your children and say, like, Billy, you're going to grow up to be a judge, and you're going to be a good judge. You're not going to be an activist judge. And the only way, like, you have to storm these courtrooms because they can use the power of the court to crush people. They're doing it slowly, and it looks legitimate, but it's just judicial activism.
Well, look at what now I don't really particularly like the news site I'm about to bring up because they do the activism journalism, but on the right. But Rebel News did discover what the Canadian government is also waging war on Amish and Mennonite farmers,
Oh,
and it
right,
looks
right.
like it's just a war on sovereignty. Because Amish and Mennonites, like, who's more sovereign than they are? Like, they have their own communities, they're self-sufficient, they grow their own food, they don't need power, they have reliable sources of water. What else more do they need? Sure, they make, extra money, and then it allows them to do more by selling, to outside the community, but they're self-sustaining. And yet the government is trying to crush them, both here and in America.
Um, I haven't watched that Rebel News interview, whatever piece, but I will. You're using the phrase sovereignty, so you're saying they're going after sovereignty. That's kind of like self-sufficiency. So the government doesn't want people to save up for their own retirement. They want people dependent on, for example, Canada Pension Plan. How, taking that back to what we said earlier, how much of this labor force participation thing where the Canadians are dropping out is because of the incentive of the welfare state, where they're cushioning people's fall when they go on employment insurance, unemployment?
I would say that this is the first time in history where that cushion has really been there to the extent that it is now. Because if you look before government created the welfare state, it was a community cushion, and it was a temporary cushion. It was based on the goodwill of your neighbors and your local community. Now it's just the government will continue to hand out. So what's forcing the change? There's no mechanism to be like, okay, get your act together and be self-sufficient. I
Oh, you're done.
saw the comment and I was
Oh,
trying to
yeah,
read it.
sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would totally agree with this comment. People are demoralized and they are getting angry. Specifically, again, my example of the labor force participation of 18 to 35-year-old men. Historically, when you see this group of men get demoralized and then eventually angry, things don't usually go very well. You saw this during the Great Depression, and governments took advantage of that and created a world war. The French Revolution comes to mind. It is a powder keg where powder just keeps getting poured on, and let's just add another keg. But
I
that
know.
being
Go ahead.
that being said, I do not think it's at the point of no return yet. There's still time. There is still actions that can be taken. There is no inevitability.
That's actually where I was kind of headed. At what point do we cross that a threshold. Um, you know the numbers better, but I saw a graph from just before Trudeau came in, surprisingly, 2014, like the last quarter. The whatever it's called, the amount of money that's invested in everything other than housing, like it just disappeared. Like it left the country. So my theory is that there's transitioning from a, let's be honest, we were never a free market. We were a mixed economy, and they're transitioning to a full-on government-run economy, and it's driving everything into the ground. And as it does, it fuels more government services like welfare. Uh, do you understand what I'm saying? Like at some point, there's no coming back from that, right?
Yeah, at a certain point, like the Trudeau government has created a negative feedback loop of where the only solution that they can come up with is more government. Oh, the government caused this? Oh, we can fix it. Oh, we caused another issue? Oh, we'll just fix that too. Um, definitely at a certain point, and I think Canada might be getting closer than anybody else at the time. I don't like to think in terms of, oh, it has to be inevitable, you know, or the there is no solution, or no win scenarios, to quote Star Trek, the Kobayashi Maru. There's always a way to win, even if you have to cheat. There's always something that can be done. I really like that quote.
The Hubert Humphrey,
Yes.
is that a U.S. president?
Isn't Humphrey, wasn't he an American industrialist or something?
Are you thinking of the aviator guy? Was that Humphrey, the guy that went nuts and locked himself in a hotel room?
No, that's someone else. But that guy's story is crazy. The end of his life is just nuts. That hotel room. No, I won't get into it. It's just no. That guy was like Tesla at the end of his life. Batshit insane.
Too much money, I guess. Um, I'm always reminded of Calvin Coolidge's words. He said, "There's nothing more rewarding than living within one's means." Oh, sage advice.
Yeah.
Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes is what we were thinking of.
Yes. Yes.
Just waiting for him to Google that and let us know. Tyler, I don't know, to wrap up the episode, any final words?
I mean, it seems like an insanely complicated problem, and I mean, unraveling all the issues, yeah, that's complicated, but I mean, the solutions are relatively easy. Just let people work, like get out of their way, and we don't need government to drive business. We just need people to be like, I can have the mentality of, I can do this, so I'm going to do this, whether it's a small business and just staying a relatively small business, or I'm going to build the next company that's as big or bigger than Amazon. We need a nation of doers, not askers.
Nice. The bumper sticker right there.
Or to paraphrase my dad, we need a nation of Catholics. Ask for forgiveness later.
Perfect place to end the episode. All right, Tyler, your handle is down at the bottom if anybody wants to follow him. That's on X, formerly Twitter. What about YouTube? Where can they follow you?
Not doing the YouTube. I'm sitting on a channel, but it's not too happy with YouTube's policies on policing speech. So everybody can find me at the dreaded green platform of Rumble, where I put out a video every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at about 12-ish. This week was kind of so far black pill week, talking about American politics on Monday and what I'm expecting between now and the election. Nothing good. But so far I'm wrong. I predicted catastrophe at the DNC. So far nothing's gone wrong, so that's great. Yesterday's video was about the Canadian economy. Again, not a very happy story. I'm expecting some very bad things to happen. But tomorrow's video is, I try to do a white pill video every Friday because we don't have enough good things being broadcast around. So tomorrow's video is, I think, authenticity in politicians is going to play an extremely big role in the coming Canadian election, in which case I think there might be lack of support for the big three parties because everybody from each faction is pointing at the other two factions and saying, oh, you're a fake, phony, and fraud.
I like what I'm hearing. I'll be sure to watch the episode tomorrow, and I'll tell my friends, whether the People's Party or Independents running, to catch it too.
Oh, so thank you.
Well, Tyler, thank you very much for hopping on. As always, information transfer is always one directional, so thanks. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Take care, buddy. And goodbye, everybody else. Have a wonderful day.